John Lott is an economist, and we're going to talk a little bit about FBI crime data. John, thank you. Welcome to the program.
It's awesome to be on. Thanks very much for having me on.
So I think you probably heard what I said about how we all feel about crime versus what we're being told about crime, which I'm used to this. Well, first of all, I believe nothing anymore. I've been fully black-pilled as it pertains to data and press and what politicians say. And even legitimate sources I rely on. I check and double check and have to go downstream because you can't rely on anything today. But certainly, was it Groucho Marx said, "What are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?" Right. And our lying eyes are telling us something.
Right. Well, I mean, for the last several years, we've seen news headline after news headline saying that people mistakenly think that crime's going up when it's actually going down. And what people need to understand is that there are two measures that we have of crime. There are crimes reported to police. That's the FBI numbers that most people rely on and what the media relies on. And then there's something from the Bureau of Justice Statistics from the National Crime Victimization Survey, which tries to get a handle on total crimes. We know that only about 40% of violent crimes are reported to police. Only about 30% of property crimes are reported to police. Prior to 2020, these two measures of crime tended to go up and down together. But since then, they've really been going in really opposite directions. So during the Biden administration, while the FBI data on reported crime showed about an 8% drop in violent crime, the measure of total crime showed a 59% increase, the largest percentage increase by far over any 4-year period of time that we've seen since these numbers started being collected. And there are a couple reasons for that. One is we've known for a long time that whether or not people report crimes to the police depends in part on whether or not people think the criminals are going to be caught and punished. And, you mentioned Los Angeles and New York. If you look at the cities over 1 million in population in the United States during 2022, the arrest rates for reported violent crime was down to 20%. The arrest rate for total violent crime was down to 8%. So that those are, not much risk of them getting caught. The other thing is, as we've seen a big drop in the number of police, 7 years ago or whatever, if you'd called up 911, they'd send out a police car and they'd take a police report. Now, in many parts of the country, they'll ask you, is the criminal still there committing the crime? And if you say no, they say, well, you can come down to the police station and you can wait in line and fill out a police report. And there are going to be some people who are going to say, it's just not worth it. Before they would have had a police report filled out. And now they say it's just too much of a hassle, particularly given the returns that are there. But look, the bottom line is pretty simple. If you want to reduce crime, you have to make it riskier for criminals to go and commit crime. You have to have higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences. And also, since you mentioned the gun issue a couple times in your introduction, make it so that victims are able to go and defend themselves. In places like Los Angeles and New York that you're mentioning, they still make it very difficult relative to the rest of the country for people to go and carry a permanent concealed handgun, for example.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. Someone we're supporting, Michael Gates, is running for AG here in California, and our AG has not been doing any lawyering or anything, frankly, other than sort of representing. His wife is trying to put a bill through that will make it illegal to actually do investigative reporting around the fraud that the government commits. That's the level of, I don't know what to call it, whether it's corruption or whatever to call it. But I bring him up only because he has a slogan, which is, I'm going to make crime illegal again. And that really goes at the crux of the problem here in California. We have undone, everything's legal. Violent crimes are legal, assault with a weapon is legal, or they're misdemeanors. They're not felonies, that's for sure. And certain kinds of assault on women and dealing drugs, trafficking drugs, using drugs, misdemeanors, or just a traffic ticket that the cops know that the addicts, in the case of the drugs, just going to tear it up, and that's the end of that. They're going to go back to stealing to support their habit, which is also legal. Crime is legal in California.
Right. Yeah, it's not rocket science. If you don't make it risky for criminals to go and commit crime, they're going to go and commit more crime. I mean, fortunately, there have been some changes. The district attorneys in San Francisco and in Los Angeles have been replaced with individuals who are much more willing than the Soros district attorneys that you had previously there to go and enforce the law. You still have issues, though, with regard to policing. Politicians still determine how police resources are going to be used and what types of crimes police are going to be going and arresting people, particularly in Los Angeles. But, so it's just a question of whether you're going to have like a new mayor in Los Angeles who's going to give different marching orders to the police that are there, and give more resources and have more police there so you can go and do things like increase the arrest rates.
Yeah, I mean, police stations are closed. The only way to file a police report in Los Angeles is either in person or online. That's it. To get an officer to come up for anything other than an imminent, violent, serious, injury crime, forget it. They're not there. Not possible.
And that's a big change from a decade ago. I mean, things have changed dramatically there, as they have in many other parts of the country. But
and fire department runs around doing paramedic runs on homeless drug addicts and fires set by homeless people, almost exclusively. Right.
Well, you're one of your mayor candidates there who had received many death threats, Pratt, when he was advised by police and his own security for he and his wife to go and get a concealed carry permit. They were denied at that time, despite facing many death threats that were there. So you're in a situation where the police have their hands tied, are not able to go and do the job that they want to be able to go and do. And at the same time, you make it impossible for civilians in many circumstances, despite lots of death threats and other direct threats against them, to go and protect themselves.
So is there a solution, or is there a way to require the politicians to be essentially more honest?
Well, look, Trump, I hoped, kind of educated people some this last year when he federalized law enforcement in D.C. and Memphis. You had many Democrats out there saying that was going to be counterproductive, that crime rates were actually going to rise. Many have called him a racist for doing it. When he federalized law enforcement in D.C., you had 18 days in a row without a single murder occurring. If you compare that to the rate that murders were occurring immediately before, there was like a 1 in 10,000 chance that you could go 18 days. As far as it being a racist, in D.C., if you look at the most recent data, 96% of the people who were being murdered were blacks. Whose lives do you think you were saving by going and stopping those murders? In January this year, there was a total of 2 murders that occurred in Washington, D.C. I mean, that's a lot of lives were being saved. And the thing, it's just not, Democrats go and claim that they care about the poor, that they care about the minorities, that they care about illegal aliens. Who do you think the victims of crimes are? Criminals tend to commit crimes against people who are like themselves. 90% of blacks are murdered by other blacks. About 85% of Hispanics are murdered by other Hispanics. Illegal aliens overwhelmingly commit crimes against other illegal aliens. And so, the situation that you have is that they want to be nice to black or Hispanic criminals that are there. But who is that at the expense of? That's at the expense of black victims, of Hispanic victims. And so, and it's more than just the direct victims of crime. When you go and have heavy crimes in those areas, stores go out of business. Who works in many of those stores? Who shops in those stores that are no longer there or has to pay higher prices because of the crime there? Who owns homes in those areas whose housing prices are depressed because of the fact that they have higher crime rates in those areas. They claim that they care about blacks and Hispanics, that they care about the poor, but the only ones that they're helping are the criminals who are going and hurting law-abiding blacks and Hispanics.
So, although I want to hear about, excuse me, the gun control myth, it's over your left shoulder there, and what you have to share with us as that pertains to that. I understand you have some data that suggests lack of air conditioning in Europe kills more people than guns in the U.S. And I have to warn you, I don't believe your data either. I don't believe anybody's data. But please make your case.
Sure. Well, I used to, when I was at Wharton and the University of Chicago, I used to teach environmental regulation type issues. And so I know a little bit about this. And, people die from hot temperatures, but they also die from cold temperatures. And, you can go and check this. Obviously, one has to rely on medical examiners and other things to accurately report that. And, there are lots of pressures and other things that they may face. So those numbers may be questionable, but at least the official numbers that you have for whether it be Europe or the United States or worldwide, you basically find that people die from cold weather at about 8 times the rate that they go and die from too high a temperatures. And so, obviously there are trade-offs that you want to have. But, often the discussion that we have over time is that somehow we're on the knife edge for the right temperature. If it gets either too warm or too cold, it's going to be a disaster. And, you look over the last 600 million years or so, and the average temperature was much higher than it is now. We're still near the bottom in terms of the temperature trough that's there. We just got out of the little ice age in 1850. If you were just to guess, you'd probably think we're going to be reversing towards the mean that's there, everything else equal. And so we still have a ways to go to even get back to the mean.
Yeah. And so guns themselves, which I'll be talking about with Andy and to some extent with Drew, you're not concerned about concealed carry creating more accidents and more suicides and more issues. In other words, I worry about that stuff from a public health standpoint, just a health standpoint.
Right.
And it really requires a lot of training and supervision to be done safely, right?
Well, look, we have about 21 million Americans in the United States who have a concealed handgun permit. You have 29 constitutional carry states where it's not necessary for somebody to have a permit to be able to go and carry. And, so we have lots of data over many decades to go and see how people behave. And one of the things that you immediately see is how incredibly law-abiding individuals are who have a concealed carry permit. They are convicted of firearms-related crimes at about 1/12 the rate that police officers are convicted of firearm-related crimes, and police are rarely convicted of firearms-related crimes, about 1/20th the rate of the general population. And most of the convictions, even for the civilians with permits, are things like forgetting to have their permit with them or accidentally carrying their permanent concealed handgun into a gun-free zone. So even those low rates really don't involve threats against other people. With regard to suicides, there's data from Michigan, for example, on suicides by concealed carry permit holders. And, once you adjust for age, basically what you find is that permit holders are committing suicide at about 30% of the rate that the general population in Michigan is committing suicides. So, if all the concealed handgun does is allow you to go and carry it outside. If somebody's going to go and commit a suicide with their gun at home, they can still do that, whether they have a permit or not. But, you can look at these things. So much of the gun control debate is about what things might possibly go wrong rather than going and looking at the data. I see this all the time with things like, allowing teachers or staff to be able to go and carry guns at schools. We have about 14,000 public schools in the United States that allow teachers and staff to carry out of about 100,000. Some of these schools have had it for decades. And you look at the legislative debates, people will say things, they're worried that a teacher may lose their temper and shoot a student, or a student may get a hold of a gun and go and harm others. Are those possible? Yeah, sure, they're possible. But we don't need to guess. You can go and look at all those cases. And looking at the data from 2000 through the end of last year, there's not one single case like that that's occurred. In fact, if you look at the data, what you find is that all the shootings at schools where anybody's been wounded or killed in an attack have all occurred in schools where teachers and staff are banned from being able to go and have guns. These killers may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid. If you read their diaries and manifestos, overwhelmingly, they want to go and get media attention. And they know the more people they kill or wound, the more media attention they're going to get. And so they the media doesn't cover this. But in their diaries and manifestos, they explain how they want to go to a gun-free zone because they think they'll be able to go and kill more people and get more media attention. And there's the question is also one of alternatives. We've recently done a study looking at all the active shootings in the United States over the 11 years from 2014 through 2024. And what you find is that civilians with concealed handgun permits actually stop much more of those attacks than uniformed police do. And I don't think people appreciate the difficult jobs that a uniformed police officer has. If you have somebody in uniform and somebody's going to go and shoot up an area and they see an officer there, they have real tactical advantages. They can either wait for the officer to leave the area before they attack, or they can move on to another target. Either one of those things make it less likely that the officer is going to be there to stop. Or if they insist on attacking there, who do you think they shoot first? We found that police, even though they stopped fewer of those attacks, were 12 times more likely to end up getting killed than the civilians that were there.
I just want to give a nod to one of your other books, Dumbing Down the Courts, How Politics Keeps the Smartest Judges Off the Bench. I think everyone now has some awareness of that, but you brought that to light in 2013. Clairvoyant.
Right. Well, the thing is, somebody like you is unlikely to ever be on a jury. And the reason is because you're a very persuasive guy. If any of the lawyers on either side of a case think that you might be leaning even so slightly the other way, they're going to strike you from the jury pool because you're more than one vote. You're likely to go and pull several of the other jurors with you. And the same thing is true with very bright judges that can be there. If they're on a panel, a circuit court panel, or on the Supreme Court, you care about whether your opponents can put the very brightest people on, because they'll make arguments that may affect the other members of the panel that are there. And so you find, for example, that if somebody goes to a top 10 law school, served on the law review, clerked for, kind of a golden ticket for clerking for an appeals court judge in the Supreme Court, it took them 167% longer to go through the confirmation process than somebody who didn't go to a top law school, didn't do particularly well in law school, and didn't get any clerkships. And they were about 37% less likely to be confirmed.
I was called into a jury box at one point, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going into they're starting to read the rules and things. And the judge goes, I'm your friend. You got to go to the bathroom? Just tell me. I'll let you go to the bathroom. No problem. So much you have a good experience here. And he goes, but I need to know if all of your peers are of one opinion and you're the standout, I need to know that you can't be persuaded by all these other people. And I said, I can't say that. There's no way I can say that. Come on. And he goes, what do you mean you can't say that? I go, you're doing it right now. You're persuading me right this minute. You're making my point. And so it's like, wow, it's such a weird world they live in with the jury pools.
You're too smart to be on maybe many juries, I'm sure.
Well, I was kicked off immediately after that. So I thought maybe the judge had done something. But, well, listen, where shall we find you? Shall we go to X or where? And well, obviously we should get the book.
They can find all our research at our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org.
crimeresearch.org. And the book is The Gun Control Myths, plural. Thank you, John. I appreciate you being here.
It's an honor to be on. Thank you for being there.
Cheers.